What would you do if your family praised your sister for stealing your life's work? I'm Amber Wilson, 28 years old, and the walking definition of second place in my own family. Not because I didn't try, not because I didn't succeed, but because I wasn't Harper. When the invitation came in that spring to attend a private family finance discussion at my grandfather's estate in New Hampshire, I felt my stomach twist. There was always hope, a fragile, naive hope that maybe this time they'd see me, that maybe this weekend would be different. But underneath that hope lived a familiar dread. In the Wilson family, wealth wasn't just inherited, it was worshipped. My father, Richard Wilson, CEO of Wilson Financial Group, had taken over from his father, Maxwell, a man who built his empire from nothing. But while Grandpa built with his hands and vision, Dad built with ego and tradition. And his favorite tool, my sister Harper. 3 years older, Harper was their golden girl. Elegant, polished, and ruthless in her ambition. When she won her first equestrian trophy at 7, they threw a catered celebration that made the local paper. When I won the state science fair at 9, they didn't even show up. They were at home because Harper had a slight cold. Wonderful Amber, my mom used to murmur, barely looking up from her charity gala planning. But try to keep it down, Harper's rehearsing. The worst part, I stopped being surprised. Our sprawling Connecticut home had separate wings, a tennis court and a pool. It also had invisible walls that kept my voice from reaching my parents. I wasn't part of the plan. While Harper sat on Dad's lap at the office pretending to answer phones, I sat in a corner building detailed cardboard skyscrapers, and the only person who ever noticed was Grandpa Maxwell. He wasn't like them. Maxwell had started his life as a construction worker. He used to say he built foundations with his hands before he ever built them with numbers. He respected people who made things fixed, saw things others couldn't. And in me, he saw something. "You've got strong hands but a stronger mind," he once told me as he examined my cardboard city. "Just remember, buildings need beauty, but they also need to stand when the wind comes." That one sentence carried me through so many silent years. High school came. I stopped trying to impress my parents. I focused on my studies, graduated valedictorian, something even Harper couldn't claim, and gave a speech my parents almost missed. They arrived late because Harper's hair appointment ran long, but Grandpa, he flew in from California just for me. He sat front row. At Cornell, I found air again. Studying architecture felt like finally speaking my language. My professors praised my designs, modern, sustainable, rooted in community. I didn't need anyone's last name to get recognition. I made it on merit. Meanwhile, Harper was getting her MBA and preparing to inherit her empire, as my father put it. After graduation, I rejected his patronizing offer to find me something at the firm. Instead, I took a modest role at a Boston architecture firm, Foster & Blaine. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Then the storms hit. My dream project, revitalizing a forgotten neighborhood with community-focused design, lost funding. Investors pulled out. Our firm downsized. My team disbanded. And just as I tried to breathe through that blow, James, my fiancé and fellow architect, accepted a job in Singapore without telling me, just left. You could always come back to the family business, my father said when I called to break the news. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. He excused himself for a more urgent call, Harper, of course. I'd barely started to piece things back together when the call came. "Your grandfather has requested your presence at Lakeview Estate," said Stanford Green, his longtime attorney. "It concerns family financial matters. Everyone will be there. Everyone." The last family gathering had been Thanksgiving. Harper had monopolized the evening with stories of million-dollar mergers, while my parents gazed at her like she walked on air. I'd made up an excuse to leave early. I didn't want another dinner pretending I didn't exist. But this wasn't optional. As I drove through the New Hampshire hills toward Lakeview Estate, I tried to brace myself. I told myself it was just one weekend, that I'd survived worse. But a small part of me, some foolish sliver, still wondered, would this be the time they finally saw me? As I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my flats, I had no idea that this weekend would shatter everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. Lakeview Estate hadn't changed. The massive Georgian mansion stood like a monument to tradition, its stone columns catching the last light of the day. The circular driveway was already filled with black sedans and luxury SUVs. It smelled like pine, old money, and generational expectations. Jackson, the longtime estate manager, appeared almost magically as I parked. "Miss Amber," he said warmly, opening my door, "it's good to see you again. Your grandfather will be pleased." "Thanks, Jackson." "How's he doing?" Jackson hesitated just enough to send a signal. Some days are better than others. Today was one of the good ones. I nodded, understanding the subtext. Grandpa's health was fading. That was likely why we were all here, not for bonding, but for business masked in sentiment. Inside the foyer buzzed with voices I recognized. Family had already gathered, uncles, aunts, cousins. Some greeted me politely. Some didn't even glance up. But then I heard the voice I dreaded. Well, look who finally made it. Harper stood halfway down the grand staircase framed by the crystal chandelier like she was posing for a photo shoot. Her hair was perfect. Her blazer probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Hello, Harper," I said, matching her tone. "Good to see you too." She descended with slow grace, the kind of stage-managed elegance that had always made our parents beam. "Love the casual look you've got going," she smirked, glancing at my plain blouse and slacks. "So brave of you." I resisted the urge to tug at my sleeves. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "Practical," I replied simply. "Some of us came to listen, not perform." Before Harper could respond, our parents emerged from the library. Their faces lit up at the sight of her and dulled the second they saw me. "Amber," my mother said with a forced smile. "You made it." "Of course," I said, trying to sound neutral. My father gave my shoulder a distracted pat. "Traffic wasn't too bad, I hope." "It was fine, Dad." "Good, good," he said quickly before turning back to Harper. "There you are, Stanford was asking about those projections." And just like that, I was dismissed again. I stood alone in the grand foyer, letting the ache sink in. Same estate, same script, until I heard the voice that mattered. "Don't let them get to you." I turned to see Grandpa Maxwell in his wheelchair near the side hallway, a plaid blanket draped over his knees, but his eyes, those sharp gray-blue eyes, were just as fierce as I remembered. "Grandpa." I knelt beside him. His hands were thinner, more fragile, but they gripped mine firmly. "My girl," he said softly. "Still the only one who bothers to hug me instead of hovering like I'm going to shatter. I never was much for hovering." I smiled, my voice catching slightly. "That's why you're my favorite." He winked, then leaned in. "Don't tell the others. I'm trying to keep the family civil until dessert." He paused, more serious now. "There's much to discuss this weekend, Amber, but first dinner. I requested your favorite." That night, the dining room looked like something out of a historic estate magazine. Polished mahogany table, silverware so heavy it could be used as weapons. Only 12 seats were set, but it still felt formal. I was placed between Aunt Judith, who thankfully asked about my life, and Cousin Patrick, who could go on for hours about golf stats no one cared about. Across the table sat the power triangle, Dad, Mom, and Harper. They dominated the conversation from appetizer to dessert. Wilson Financial just closed the Denning Systems deal, Dad announced with smug pride. Harper led the negotiations. Brilliant work. Harper demurred with perfect timing. "I just used what you taught me, Daddy." My mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. "She saved us $5 million. The board was stunned. Then Dad added, "They're voting next month on creating a new C-level position, Chief Strategy Officer. Harper's the natural choice." I pushed my asparagus around the plate. Harper basked in the attention like she was already seated at the executive table. And then came the dagger. My mother turned to me. "And how's your drawing going, Amber?" I'm an architect, Mom, I corrected. I design real buildings, not doodles. In fact, the community center project just got new funding. We break ground next month. Oh, how nice, she said, the way someone might respond to a child's macaroni art. Then Harper tell everyone about the Hong Kong deal, darling. I didn't respond, I didn't cry, but I did catch Grandpa watching me, and for once he looked angry. After dinner, most of the family filtered into the drawing room for drinks. I excused myself and stepped out onto the back terrace. The garden was still blooming from early spring lilac and night jasmine on the breeze. It was peaceful, real. Until I heard the voices coming from the library. The door was slightly ajar. My parents and Harper. He's revised his estate plan, my father said. The announcement tomorrow is major. Did he tell you details? Harper asked. Not everything, Dad replied. But we'll be pleased. He said something about recognizing true business leadership. Well, it's only right, Mom chimed in. Harper has earned it. What about Amber? Harper asked. Dad laughed, sharp and dismissive. What about her? She chose her path. She can't expect equal footing when she's done nothing for the company. Richard, Mom said gently, she's still your daughter. And I've supported her enough, he snapped. College rent, this is different. This is about the future. I backed away, each word cutting deeper than the last. They had already made their choice, but someone else had been watching too. And when the next day came, I would learn that not all legacies are earned with praise. Some are earned in silence. Saturday morning arrived with a strange stillness. The lake outside my window shimmered beneath early sunlight, peaceful, mockingly so. I barely slept. My dreams had been loud with my father's words, each syllable a reminder of how easy it was for them to dismiss me. Again. Still I dressed with care, a navy dress, structured but simple. No statement jewelry, no bold makeup, just clean lines, quiet confidence. I didn't know what was coming, but I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. At breakfast, tension hummed beneath every word spoken. Harper somehow fresh and radiant despite last night's late strategy session, with Dad held court with their usual audience. My mother busied herself keeping Harper's coffee filled and mine empty. At 10 Oro sharp, Jackson stepped into the room. Mr. Wilson requests everyone's presence in the library in 15 minutes. Just like that, the real game began. The library, Grandpa's favorite room, had been transformed. His vast redwood desk stood at the front. Leather-bound volumes lined the 2-story walls, and in front of the desk chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, like we were preparing for a verdict. Stanford Green. The family attorney stood ready with stacks of documents and a tablet. Grandpa was already there, seated in his wheelchair in a crisp suit and burgundy tie. His face was unreadable as each family member filed in and took their seat. Once the murmurs died down, Stanford cleared his throat. Mr. Wilson has asked that we begin today with personal announcements before proceeding with estate matters. That raised a few eyebrows, but my father stood calm and confident. Catherine and I have been considering how best to secure the future of Wilson Financial. We believe that rather than waiting for a traditional inheritance, we should reward demonstrated commitment now. He paused dramatically. Everyone watched, waiting. We've decided to allocate $5 million to Harper, effective immediately. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. This will give her the freedom to further her vision for the company, he continued, while my mother handed Harper a navy blue folder, like it was a crown. I'm honored, Harper said sweetly. I'll continue to lead with the same integrity and passion I've always shown. A round of polite applause followed. Then, silence. My father turned to me with all the enthusiasm of someone remembering a forgotten receipt. As for Amber, he said flatly, we wish her well in her architectural pursuits and hope this encourages her to aim for success like her sister. And just like that, I was dismissed again. Not even a token amount. Not even the pretense of equality. Just a smileless benediction and a suggestion that maybe I work harder. I nodded slowly, jaw-clenched, eyes burning. But then, something happened. My grandfather raised his hand. Everything stopped. Even in his frailty, Grandpa Maxwell had gravity, and today it was heavier than ever. He slowly, painfully stood. My father jumped to help, but Grandpa waved him off. "I can stand on my own," he said, his voice firm. "Something I'm not sure you've ever done, Richard." That one line landed like a thunderclap. The room went still. He took a shaky step forward, one hand gripping the desk for balance. Then he looked up at my father, at Harper, and finally at me. "Amber, please sit down. What I have to say concerns you most." I obeyed, moving to the empty chair across from him. Every eye followed. "My family," he began, his voice low but clear. "I've spent a lifetime building something brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Not just a company, but a code, integrity, vision, loyalty." He turned toward my father. "When I brought you into the business, Richard, I hoped I was passing on more than ledgers and stock options. I hoped I was passing on a legacy of values." My father's face twitched. "Dad, this isn't silence." Grandpa said, not loudly but with such quiet command that my father actually stopped mid-sentence. "I've watched long enough," Grandpa continued. "Watched how you've twisted this company, watched how you've elevated one daughter while ignoring the other." He turned to me then, and his expression softened. "Amber, from the moment you built your first city out of cardboard in my office, I knew you were different. You weren't chasing attention. You were chasing meaning." I swallowed hard. "I followed your career, your work in community architecture, your efforts to create beauty that also serves. You've done all this without using the Wilson name." Then turning to Harper, his tone hardened again. "And I've also watched you." Harper stiffened. "The Denning acquisition you boasted about, you obtained their confidential financial data through blackmail. The Singapore expansion you took credit for, that was Julia's work. Your subordinate whom you demoted when she spoke up." Harper turned pale. "Business requires backbone, not sabotage," Grandpa snapped. "You've led through fear and deception, not merit." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain envelope. Not a presentation folder, not a monogrammed binder. Just a white envelope with one word, my name. "Amber, this is for you." I opened it slowly, hands trembling. It was a check for $55 million. And then, as jaws dropped and whispers spread, Grandpa said the 6 words that would change my life forever. "This is only the beginning, Amber." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. $55 million. The check in my hand didn't feel real. My name was printed in sharp black ink. My fingers trembled. I looked up at Grandpa, wide-eyed. This can't be." "It is," he said simply, "and it's just the start." The room had plunged into stunned silence, broken only by the soft creak of my mother's chair as she lurched to her feet. "You can't do this," she cried, eyes wild. "This is outrageous." "That money is mine," Grandpa interrupted calmly, "and I can do whatever I damn well please with it." "This is about punishing Richard," she shouted, pointing toward my father. "You're bypassing your own son to give everything to someone who's done nothing for this family. Nothing." I stood frozen, the check still between my fingers. My father rose, then his composure starting to crack. "Is this really about business, Dad? Or are you just angry I didn't run the company exactly like you did? It's about character," Grandpa snapped. "About the rot I've watched eat through this family from the inside while you congratulated yourselves on quarterly earnings and backdoor deals." Then his voice dropped. Quiet, but deadly. "I've had investigators watching for years. You could have heard a pin drop. I know what Harper's done, what you've allowed, what you've encouraged. I know about the harassment complaints swept under rugs, the environmental violations, the falsified reports." Harper's face turned sheet white. "That's slander," she choked out. "It's documented," he said flatly, "and now it's over." Stanford stepped forward, holding a new folder. Mr. Wilson's estate plan includes the creation of the Wilson Legacy Trust. Effective immediately, Miss Amber Wilson is named sole trustee. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means Stanford said evenly you control all assets within the trust, including the Wilson Financial Group, all investment properties, and the family estates. You are now the majority stakeholder and legal authority across all Wilson holdings. Gasps rippled through the room. You're destroying everything we built, my father bellowed. No, Grandpa said firmly. I'm saving it. From you. Harper recovered enough to go on the offensive. She has no business experience. She draws pictures of buildings. How is she supposed to run an empire with more grace than you've shown? Grandpa replied. Harper surged to her feet. This is insane. This isn't over. No, Stanford said, stepping between her and Grandpa. But it is binding. Any legal challenge to the trust results in immediate forfeiture of all positions and future distributions, as per Clause 18C. That includes you, Ms. Harper. You're bluffing, she spat. You're welcome to test it, Stanford said, calm as ever. My mother was trembling. You'll regret this, she said, barely audible. She'll ruin everything. I trust her, Grandpa said quietly, because she builds things, not just structures, but trust, community, compassion. She's the only one here who hasn't tried to manipulate me. He turned to me, and suddenly the room faded around us. Amber, he said, I know this is a heavy burden. You don't have to accept it. If you decline it, all goes to the foundation. But if you accept, you become the future. I looked at the check, at Harper's livid expression, at my parents' betrayal, and finally at Grandpa. I accept, I said, my voice steady. Something shifted in that moment, not just in the room, but in me. For the first time, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. Then we move forward, Grandpa said, settling back into his chair, visibly spent. Stanford, proceed. As he began outlining the next steps, Harper stormed out, knocking over a chair. My father followed, eyes burning holes in my back. My mother lingered just long enough to throw me one last glare before slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was thick with fallout. You'll need time to prepare, Stanford told me gently, but you won't be alone. I sat beside Grandpa as Stanford explained the board transition process. How trusted advisors had already been vetted, how structures were in place. My head spun, but the foundation was there. Then the door creaked again. It was Aunt Judith, her signature whiskey in hand. Well, she said, taking a sip that was more interesting than the opera. She looked at me with a small, approving smile. For what it's worth, you're the only one who's ever earned it. I always told Maxwell substance over show. I blinked. You knew about this. She shrugged. Let's just say your grandfather and I have had an understanding for years. He's always seen further than most. I smiled faintly, but my heart was still racing. Judith leaned in, lowering her voice. They'll regroup. They're probably on the phone with attorneys right now. I figured, I said. Are you ready for that? I paused, then nodded. I have to be. Because if I'd learned anything from this family, it's that the ones who smile at dinner will still sharpen knives by morning. The next morning at Lakeview Estate felt like the eye of a storm calm, but with tension humming beneath the surface. I laced up my running shoes and escaped into the woods. The familiar trails grounded me as my mind spun through transition plans, legal terminology, and the look on Harper's face when I said, I accept. When I returned sweaty and clear-headed, the house was buzzing. In the breakfast room, my parents and Harper sat at one end of the table. Their voices dropped the second I entered. Papers were spread out between them, legal pads, manila folders, what looked like printouts of trust law. Good morning, I said evenly, pouring coffee. Only Aunt Judith responded, raising her teacup like we were sharing an inside joke. As I took my seat beside her, Jackson wheeled Grandpa in. Despite yesterday's dramatic scene, he looked sharper today. Rested eyes clear, dressed in a soft gray sweater and tailored slacks. Beautiful morning, isn't it? He announced cheerfully. Perfect for building legacies. He winked at me. Minutes later, Stanford entered crisp and methodical as always. Mr. Wilson, everything is ready. The study had been transformed into a war room. A projector displayed flowcharts of restructuring plans. Thick leather binders marked with tabs sat beside each chair. It wasn't just symbolic anymore, it was happening. I took my place beside Grandpa as Stanford began his presentation. Effective immediately, he began, Amber Wilson assumes trustee authority over the Wilson Legacy Trust. She will serve as final signatory on all major transactions, with a board of advisors providing oversight. Slides flashed on screen, revised bylaws, updated org charts, timelines for transition. My father, seated across from me, finally spoke. "This is corporate kidnapping," he said through gritted teeth. "You expect us to answer to her? Stanford didn't flinch. I expect you to honor the legal structure your father has chosen. You may contest it, but as previously stated, doing so triggers forfeiture clauses. This is coercion. This is consequence," Grandpa corrected. "A concept unfamiliar to you, I know." My mother shifted tactics. "Amber, sweetheart, you have every right to feel proud, but this puts you in an impossible position. You've never led a company. It's not your world." I turned to face her fully. "And whose fault is that you saw potential in Harper and shaped her path? I built mine without you." "Architecture is not business," she said tightly. "No, I agreed. But it's vision, discipline, integrity, everything this family forgot." Grandpa smiled faintly. "Told you she'd say that." Then Harper spoke calm and sharp. "I've given my life to this company, worked 80-hour weeks, built international partnerships, and now I'm watching someone who played with cardboard cities get handed the kingdom." I didn't flinch. "You mean the cardboard cities that became blueprints for sustainable housing in Boston?" Her jaw clenched. "Let's be honest," I said. "You didn't want the responsibility. You wanted the throne." That was when I dropped it, the proof I'd held onto for years, the Wilson headquarters expansion. "Remember that the eco-efficiency designs you pitched to the board, they were mine." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I submitted them to you during our college internship," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "You dismissed them. Then months later you presented the exact ideas under your name." Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. "There are timestamps, original sketches, email threads, witnesses. You saved all this. I was protecting myself," I said evenly. "Not plotting, just surviving." My father looked shaken for the first time. "Is this true?" Harper didn't answer. Stanford cleared his throat. "This level of documentation would hold up in court, yes." My mother looked between us, something like regret flickering in her eyes. "We've given you everything," she whispered. "No," I replied softly. "You gave Harper everything. I built what I have from the scraps." The meeting ended in stunned silence. As the others filed out, my mother paused beside me. "You could fix this," she said gently. "You could make it right." "This is right," I said. "Maybe not easy, but right." She said nothing more. That night, as the house fell quiet, I sat with Stanford in the study. "What happens now?" I asked. "You prepare," he said, "because they're going to come after you." He handed me another binder. Inside were dossiers, names, profiles, internal allies across Wilson companies. Executives Grandpa had quietly identified over the years. Ethical, sharp, loyal. "Build your inner circle," Stanford advised. "Start now." Because they weren't done fighting. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the war. The next few days passed in a blur of signatures, briefings, and strategic silence. Harper, my father, and my mother left the estate with lawyers in tow and tempers barely leashed. As Stanford predicted, they reached out to board members, investors, and longtime allies, hoping to stir dissent. What they didn't expect was transparency. Instead of hiding, I called a full leadership summit. I laid out Grandpa's vision, the restructuring plans, and the ethical mandates that would shape Wilson Financial moving forward. I didn't beg for loyalty, I asked for accountability, and one by one they gave it. Even some of the old guard, long disillusioned with the company's trajectory, found themselves leaning in. Turns out, Integrity isn't just moral, it's magnetic. 3 weeks later, I moved into my new office in Wilson Towers' East Wing. It overlooked Boston Harbor, and it was the same office my grandfather had used when he was CEO. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from being shut out of family meetings to signing off on multi-million-dollar projects. But even now, I didn't feel like a queen. I felt like a builder, laying the foundation for something better. The Wilson Foundation for Community Architecture was my first real imprint. We broke ground on our inaugural project, a sustainable housing development with integrated green spaces, community clinics, and local business incubators. I didn't slap my name on the side of the buildings. Instead, I put the focus where it mattered: access, beauty, dignity. And then came the day that everything came full circle. A letter arrived on my desk, handwritten in precise, looping script. Harper. She wanted to meet. I hesitated for 2 days before agreeing. We met in the Foundation's project lounge, a minimalist space filled with sketches and site models. She looked different, tired, but less guarded. I've been angry, she admitted. Not just at you, at everything. The expectation, the pressure, the need to win at all costs. I said nothing. I thought I had to be the heir, that if I didn't win Dad's approval, I was nothing. You still have time to redefine what success means, I said, but you don't get to cheat your way through it. She nodded. I want to come back, under your terms. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. You can, I said, but only if you're willing to be transparent, accountable, honest. I am, she said quietly. I want to be better, not just look better. And for the first time, I believed her. Over the months that followed, Harper worked her way back not into power, but into purpose. We weren't close, not yet. But the war between us faded into something quieter. We became, if not friends, then something like collaborators, reconstructing what ambition had broken. As for my parents, they kept their distance. My father took a consulting role overseas. My mother retreated into her social circles. Occasionally they sent updates, birthday cards, surface-level gestures. It still hurt, but I'd stopped bleeding from those old wounds. Because Grandpa was right. The real measure of wealth isn't money. It's what you build that outlasts you. 6 months later, we held the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our first community site. The governor came. So did reporters. But the most important guest sat quietly in the front row, wrapped in a blanket and wearing a tired but proud smile. Grandpa Maxwell. He'd held on long enough to see it. As I stood at the podium facing the crowd and the sunlit skyline beyond, I didn't talk about inheritance or revenge or redemption. I talked about the power of building something with intention. We're not just putting up buildings, I said. We're constructing lives around dignity. We're replacing hollow success with human impact. I paused, then smiled. And we're proving that legacies aren't about bloodlines or boardrooms. They're about values carried forward by those willing to fight for them. After the ceremony, as I knelt beside Grandpa's wheelchair, he reached for my hand. You did it, he said softly. Not the easy way, the right way. I had the best blueprint, I whispered. He chuckled. That cardboard city in my office. Who knew I did, I said. He patted my hand once, then looked out at the crowd. Make them proud, he said, but more importantly, make yourself proud. Because wealth is measured not in what you own, but in what you build that serves others. And now if this story reminds you of your own journey, tell me, have you ever been overlooked only to rise? Has someone finally seen in you what others missed? Drop your story in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales of justice, redemption, and the families that tried to stop it. Because legacies, they aren't inherited, they're built.